was true. Our story begins in the town of Styria, in Austria, in the mid-1800s. Almost 3 decades before Bram Stoker would pen Dracula. However, the threat of vampirism had plagued Austria for centuries. What you are about to hear draws inspiration from real letters written by a real woman whose first love happened to be with a woman. Fanu, the author of tonight's tale, took advantage of Laura's early death by childbirth and her letters that posthumously ended up going public. Was Carmilla really a vampire? Well, that's for you to decide. I'll tell the story from Laura's perspective. And thus we begin in her manor house, its many-windowed front, its towers, and its Gothic chapel. I have said that this is a very lonely place. Looking from the hall door towards the road, the forest in which our castle stands extends in every direction. The nearest inhabited village is about 7 of your English miles to the east. The nearest inhabited manor house of any historic association, that of old General Spielsdorf, is nearly 20 miles away to the west. I have said the nearest inhabited village, because there is only 3 miles westward a ruined chateau with a quaint roofless church and moldering tombs of the proud family of Karnstein. It's just my father and I at our manor house. My mother died in my infancy, but I had a good-natured governess who had been with me since then. I cannot remember a time when her fat, benevolent face was not a familiar picture in my memory. She is Madame Percussion. There's also Mademoiselle de La Fontaine, a lady who you might call a finishing governess. She speaks French and German, and Madame Percussion French and broken English, to which my father and I add unbroken English. The consequence is a babble, at which strangers laugh, and which I shall make no attempt to reproduce in this narrative. There are the occasional 2 or 3 young lady friends, close to my own age, who were occasional visitors. But my life is rather a solitary one, I can assure you. The first occurrence in my life, which produced a terrible impression upon my mind, was one of the very earliest incidents I can recollect. The nursery, which I had all to myself, was a large room in the uppermost story of the manor house with a steep oak roof. I can't have been more than 6 years old the night I awoke and from my bed failed to see the nursery maid. I was not frightened, for I was one of those happy children who are studiously kept in ignorance of ghost stories or fairy tales or the lore that makes us cover up our heads when the door cracks suddenly or the flicker of a fluttering candle makes the shadow of a bedpost dance upon the wall. I was vexed and insulted at finding myself neglected, and I began to whimper in preparation for a burst of sobs. It was only then that I saw the solemn but very pretty face looking at me from the side of the bed. The young lady was kneeling with her hands under the coverlet. I looked at her with a kind of pleased wonder and ceased whimpering. She caressed me with her hands and lay down beside me on the bed. She drew me towards her, and I felt immediately soothed and fell asleep again. Then 2 needles ran into my breast very deep at the same moment. I cried loudly. The lady started back, her eyes fixed on me, then slipped down upon the floor, and I thought hid herself under the bed. Frightened, I yelled with all my might. Nurse, nursery maid, housekeeper, all came running in, and hearing my story, made light of it. perceive that their faces were pale with uncharacteristic expressions of anxiety, and I saw them look under the bed and about the room, peep under tables, and pluck open cupboards. The housekeeper whispered to the nurse, "Lay your hand along that hollow in the bed. Someone did lie there. The place is still warm." Everyone examined the place where I told them I felt at the puncture, and pronounced that there was no sign visible that any such thing had happened to me. From that time, a servant always sat with me in the nursery until I was about 14. I am now 18. It was a sweet summer evening, and my father asked me, as he sometimes did, to take a walk with him along our manor house's beautiful forest vista. "General Spilsdorf cannot come to us as soon as I had hoped," said my father. He was presently meant to pay us a week's-long visit, and we'd expected his arrival the next day. He was to have brought with him a young lady, his niece and ward, Mademoiselle Reinfeldt, whom I had never seen, but whom I had heard described as a very charming girl, and I had promised myself many happy days. "Then, how soon does he come?" I asked. "Not until autumn, I dare say. And I'm very glad now that you never knew Miss Reinfeldt, because the poor young lady is dead. Here is the General's letter. I'm afraid he is in great affliction. The letter appears to me to have been written in distraction." The letter read, "I have lost her, and now learn all too late. The fiend who betrayed our infatuated hospitality has done it all. I thought I was receiving into my house innocence, gaiety, a charming companion for my lost Bertha. Heavens, what a fool I have been! I devote my remaining days to tracking and extinguishing the monster. I mean to devote myself for a time of inquiry, which may possibly lead me as far as Vienna, sometime in the autumn, 2 months hence, or earlier if I live. I will see you. I will then tell you all that I scarce dare put upon paper now. Pray for me, dear friend. Farewell!" The evening continued to pass, with the moon shining brilliantly. At the drawbridge, we met Madame Perrodon and Mademoiselle de La Fontaine. They discoursed upon the scene, waxing eloquent about the moon. She said, "The moon this night is full of odyllic and magnetic influence. And see, when you look behind you, at the front of the manor house, how all of its windows flash and twinkle with that silvery splendor, as if unseen hands have lighted up the rooms to receive fairy guests." The sound of carriage wheels and many hooves upon the road arrested our attention. As the carriage passed the summit of the steep bridge, one of the lead horses took fright, and the whole team broke into a wild gallop together. You see, just before the castle drawbridge, there stood by the roadside an ancient stone cross, at which sight the horses, now going at a pace that was perfectly frightful, swerved. The wheel buckled over the projecting roots of the tree, and the company came thundering along the road towards us with the speed of a hurricane. From the carriage window came a long and terrible scream. Two of the horses lay sprawled on the ground. The carriage lay upon its side, with 2 wheels spinning in the air. The men were busy removing the traces, and a lady with a commanding figure climbed out. Through the open carriage door, I could see a young lady who appeared to be lifeless. My dear father was already beside the elder lady, tendering his aid and the resources of his manor house, as the young lady was placed against the slope of the bank. I approached her. She was apparently stunned, but certainly not dead. Was ever a being so born to calamity? The elder lady cried. Here I am, on a journey of life and death, in which to lose an hour is to lose all. My child will not have recovered sufficiently to resume her route, for who can say how long? I must leave her. How far on, sir, can you tell, is the nearest village? I must leave her there till my return, 3 months hence. I plucked my father by the coat and whispered earnestly in his ear, Pray, ask her to let her stay with us. It would be so delightful. I could never ask that of you, sir. It would be to task your kindness and chivalry too cruelly. My father responded. It would, on the contrary, confer unto us a very great kindness at the moment when we most need it. My daughter has just been disappointed by a cruel misfortune in a visit from which she had long anticipated a great deal of happiness. If you confide this young lady to our care, it will be her best consolation. If, as you say, you are unable to suspend your journey, you must part with her tonight. Nowhere could you do so with more honest assurances of care and tenderness than here. We greatly appreciate your invitation, sir. And with that, the elder lady stepped back into her carriage, and it whirled away. In the hall, servants waited to receive our new guest, and she was conducted forthwith to her room. I hadn't even the chance to glance upon her. How do you like our guest? Asked my nursemaids. I like her extremely, answered Madame. She is the prettiest creature I ever saw. So nice, with such a sweet voice. Did you notice the other woman in the carriage? The one who did not get out, but only looked from the window. Mademoiselle went on to describe a woman with a colored turban on her head who was gazing all the time from the carriage window, grinning sinisterly, with gleaming white eyeballs and teeth set as if in fury. And what of the ill-looking pack of men the servants were? Yes, said my father, ugly, hanged-up-looking fellows, as ever I beheld in my life. Their faces so strangely lean and dark and sullen. They are clever rogues. They got everything to rights in a minute. The physician finally got there slightly after 1. He reported very favorably upon his patient. She was now sitting up, her pulse quite regular, apparently perfectly well. There could be no harm, certainly, in my seeing her, if we both wished it. Apparently, Carmilla desired nothing more. She was sitting up, her slender, pretty figure wreathed in a silk dressing gown, embroidered with flowers. What was it that, as I reached her bedside and began my greeting, struck me dumb in a moment and made me recoil from her? I saw the very face which had visited me in my childhood at night, which remained so fixed in my memory, and on which I had for so many years often ruminated with horror. It was pretty, even beautiful, and wore the same melancholic expression as when I first beheld it. Her countenance kindled into a strange, fixed smile of recognition. How wonderful, she exclaimed. 12 years ago, I saw your face in a dream, and it has haunted me ever since. Wonderful indeed, I repeated, pushing through the horror that had struck me dumb. 12 years ago, in vision or reality, I certainly saw you. I cannot forget your face. It has remained my eyes ever since. Her smile softened. Whatever I had fancied strange in it was gone, and it and her dimpling cheeks were now delightfully pretty and intelligent. I took her hand as I spoke. I was a little shy, as lonely people are, but the situation made me eloquent and even bold. She took my hand, and her eyes glowed as she peered into mine. She smiled again and blushed. Carmilla began. Let me tell you what happened 12 years hence. I awoke from a confused and troubled dream and found myself in a room unlike my nursery. The beds were all empty, and the room without anyone but myself in it. I crept under one of the beds to reach the window, but as I rose, I heard someone crying. You, most assuredly you as I see you now. A beautiful young lady with golden hair and large blue eyes and lips, your lips, you, as you are here. Your looks won me. I climbed on the bed and put my arms around you, and I think we both fell asleep. I was awoken by a cry. You were sitting up, screaming. I was frightened and slipped down upon the ground and, it seemed to me, lost consciousness for a moment. When I came to, I was again in my nursery at home. Your face I've never forgotten since. I don't know which one of us should be more afraid of the other. If you were less pretty, I think I should be very much afraid of you. But I feel I already have a right to your intimacy. At all events, it does seem as if we were destined, from our earliest childhood, to be friends. Do you feel as strangely drawn towards me as I do to you? The truth is, I did feel drawn towards her, but there was also something of repulsion. In this ambiguous feeling, however, the sense of attraction immensely prevailed. She had won me. She was so beautiful and engaging. Languor and exhaustion stole over her, and I hastened to bid her good night. She held me close in her pretty arms for a moment, and whispered in my ear, "Good night, darling. It is very hard to part with you, but good night. Tomorrow, but not early, I shall see you again." I told you that I was charmed with her in most particulars. There were some that did not please me so well. For instance, there was a coldness, it seemed to me, beyond her years, in her persistent refusal to afford me the least ray of light. What she did tell me amounted, in my unconscionable estimation, to nothing. It was all summed up in 3 very vague disclosures. First, her name was Carmilla. Second, her family was very ancient and noble. Third, her home lay in the direction of the west. Sometimes after an hour of apathy, my strange and beautiful companion would take my hand and hold it with a fond pressure, renewed again and again, blushing softly, gazing in my face with languid and burning eyes, and breathing so fast that her dress rose and fell with a tumultuous respiration. It was like the ardor of a lover. It embarrassed me. Her hot lips traveled along my cheek in kisses, and she would whisper almost in sobs, "You are mine. You shall be mine. You and I are one forever." "Are we related?" I used to ask. "What can you mean by all this? I don't know you. I don't know myself when you look so and talk so." Was she subject to brief visitations of insanity, or was there here a disguise and a romance? I had read in old storybooks of such things. What if a boyish lover had found his way into the house and sought to pursue his paramour in masquerade, with the assistance of a clever old adventuress? There were many things against this hypothesis. highly interesting as it was to my vanity, I could boast of no masculine attentions. As we sat one afternoon under the trees, a funeral passed us by. I rose to mark my respect as the congregation passed and joined in the hymn that they were very sweetly singing. "Don't you perceive how discordant that is?" Carmilla said brusquely. "On the contrary, I think it very sweet. I resumed, therefore, and was interrupted. "You pierce my ears," said Carmilla, stopping them with her tiny fingers. "You must die. Everyone must die, and all are happier when they do." Days had passed, and the figure of a wanderer, whom I knew very well, entered the courtyard. He used to visit the manor house generally twice a year. He was a hunchback with sharp, lean features. He had a pointed black beard and was smiling from ear to ear, showing his white teeth. He had a fiddle, a pair of foils and masks attached to his belt, and several other mysterious cases. His companion was a rough, spare dog that followed at his heels. He bowed, then disengaging his fiddle, he began to scrape a lively air, to which he sang with a merry discord, dancing ludicrously. It made me laugh in spite of the dog's howling. "Will your ladyships be pleased to buy an amulet against the umpire, which I hear is hunting like a wolf through these woods? Pin it to your pillow, and you may laugh in his face." Carmilla instantly purchased one, and so did I. As he looked up in our faces, he seemed to detect something that piqued his curiosity. In an instant, he unrolled a leather case full of odd little steel instruments. "See here, my lady, I profess among other things less useful, the art of dentistry. Oh, woof, 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 plague take the dog. Your noble friend, the young lady at your right, has the sharpest tooth, long, thin, pointed, like an awl, like a needle. Here am I, here are my file, and my punch. I will make it blunt if her ladyship pleases. No longer the tooth of a fish, but of a beautiful young lady such as she is. Is the young lady displeased? Have I been too bold? Have I offended her?" Carmilla responded, "How dares that mountebank insult us so? Where's your father? My father would have had the wretch tied up to the pump, flogged with a cart whip, and burnt to the bones with a cattle brand." More days passed, and in the evening there arrived from Gratz the picture cleaner, with a horse and cart laden with 2 large packing cases, having many pictures in each. My mother was of an old Hungarian family, and most of these pictures had come to us through her. "There is a picture that I have not yet seen. In one corner, at the top of it, is the name as well as I could read, Marcia Karnstein, and the date, 1698. I am curious to see how it has turned out." The artist now produced it with evident pride. It was quite beautiful and startling. It seemed to live, and it was the effigy of Carmilla. "Carmilla, dear, here's an absolute miracle. Here you are, living, smiling, ready to speak in this picture." She did not acknowledge my pretty speech, did not seem to hear it. She was leaning back in her seat, her fine eyes under their long lashes, gazing on me in contemplation. She smiled in a kind of rapture. I said, "And now you can read quite plainly the name that is written in the corner. It is not Marcia. The name is near Kala, Countess Karnstein. I am descended from the Karnsteins. That is, my mother was. She then rose, and each with an arm about the other's waist, we walked out upon the pavement. In silence, slowly, we walked down to the drawbridge, where the beautiful landscape opened before us. You asked for the picture you think like me, to hang in your room, she murmured with a sigh, as she drew her arm closer about my waist and let her pretty head sink upon my shoulder. How romantic you are, Carmilla. Whenever you do in fact tell me your story, it will be made up chiefly of one great romance. She then kissed me silently. I am sure, Carmilla, you have been in love, that there is at this moment an affair of the heart going on. She responded, I have been in love with no one, and never shall, unless it should be with you. But there occurred that night an event which gave my thoughts quite a new turn, and seemed to startle even Carmilla's languid nature into momentary energy. Several evenings had since passed. I got into my bed and fell asleep. That night, dreams came through stone walls and lit up dark rooms and lightened dark ones. I cannot call it a nightmare, for I was quite conscious of being asleep, but I was equally conscious of being in my room and lying in bed precisely as I actually was. I saw, or fancied I saw, the room and its furniture just as I had seen it last, except that it was very dark, and I saw something moving around the foot of the bed, which at first I could not accurately distinguish. But soon I saw that it was a sooty black animal that resembled a monstrous cat. It appeared to me about 4 or 5 feet long. I could not cry out, although I was terrified. The room rapidly became darker and darker, at length so dark that I could no longer see anything of it but its eyes. I felt it spring lightly on the bed. The 2 broad eyes approached my face, and suddenly I felt a stinging pain as if 2 large needles darted an inch or 2 apart, deep into my breast. I woke with a scream. The room was lighted by the candle that burned there all through the night, and I saw a female figure standing at the foot of the bed. She was in a dark, loose dress, and her hair was down and covered her shoulders. There was not the slightest stir of respiration. A block of stone could not have been more still. As I stared at her, the figure appeared to change her place, and was now nearer the door, then close to it. The door opened, and she exited. I was now relieved and able to breathe and move. My first thought was that Carmilla had been playing a trick on me and that I had forgotten to secure my door. I hastened to it and found it locked, as usual, on the inside. I was afraid to open it. I was horrified. I sprang into my bed and covered my head up in the bedclothes and lay there more dead than alive until morning. For some nights, I slept profoundly, but still every morning I felt the same lassitude, and a languor waited upon me all day. I felt myself a changed woman. A strange melancholy was stealing over me. Dim thoughts of death began to open. An idea that I was slowly declining took a gentle and somehow not unwelcome possession of me. Whatever it was, my soul acquiesced to it. I would not admit that I was ill. Carmilla became more devoted to me than ever, and her strange paroxysms of languid adoration were frequent. She doted on me with increasing ardor the more my strength and spirits waned. It was now 3 weeks since the commencement of this unaccountable state. My sufferings had, during the last week, told upon my appearance. I had grown pale, my eyes were dilated and darkened underneath, and the languor, which I had long felt, began to display itself in my countenance. My father asked me often whether I was ill, but I persisted in assuring him that I was quite well. One night, I woke to hear a voice, sweet and tender, and at the same time terrible, which said, "Your mother warns you to beware of the assassin." At the same time, a light unexpectedly sprang up, and I saw Carmilla standing near the foot of my bed in her white nightdress, bathed from her chin to her feet in one great stain of blood. I woke with a shriek, certain that Carmilla was being murdered. I remember springing from my bed. My next recollection is standing in the hallway, crying for help. Madame and Mademoiselle came scurrying out of their rooms in alarm. They soon learned the cause of my terror. I insisted that we knock on Carmilla's door. Our knocking was unanswered. It soon became a pounding. eyes aloft in the doorway, and so stared into the room. We called her by name, but still there was no reply. We looked around. Everything was undisturbed. It was exactly in the state in which I had left it on bidding her good night. But Carmilla was gone. Every part of the chateau was searched. The grounds were explored. No trace of the missing lady could be discovered. The men prepared to drag the streams. My father was into distraction. What a tale to have to tell the poor girl's mother on her return. I, too, was beside myself, though my grief was quite of a different kind. The morning passed in alarm and excitement. It was now 1 o'clock, and still no tidings. Returning to Carmilla's room, I found her standing at her dressing table. I was astounded. I could not believe my eyes. She beckoned me to her with her pretty finger in silence. Her face expressed extreme fear. I ran to her in an ecstasy of joy and embraced her again and again and again. I ran to the bell and rang it vehemently to bring others to her room. Dear Carmilla, what has become of you all this time? Where have you been? How did you come back? It was past 2 last night. When I went to sleep, as usual, in my bed, with my doors locked, but I woke just now on the sofa in the dressing room there, and I found the door between the rooms open, and the other door forced. How could all of this have happened without my being wakened? How could I have been carried out of my bed without my sleep having been interrupted? She had but the one story to tell, and seemed the least able of all the party to suggest any way of accounting for what had happened. My father took a turn up and down the room thinking. I saw Carmilla's eye follow him for a moment with a sly, dark glance. Will you forgive me, my dear, if I risk a conjecture? I believe you were sleepwalking. Why, yes, I have been told of this often by my old nurse. My father continued, may we congratulate ourselves on the certainty that the most natural explanation of the occurrence is one that involves no drugging, no burglars or witches, nothing that need alarm Carmilla. Case closed. The next morning early, the doctor, for whom my father had sent in secret, arrived to see me. I told him my story, and as I proceeded, he appeared graver and graver. My father was sent for accordingly, and as he entered smiling, he said, I dare say, doctor, you are going to tell me that I'm an old fool for having brought you here. I hope I am. But his smile faded into shadow as the doctor, with his very grave face, beckoned him. Their voices were all the less audible from the recess of the window across the room. After a time, my father turned to face me. He looked pale, thoughtful, and I noticed agitated. Laura, dear, come here for a moment. You mentioned a sensation like that of 2 needles piercing the skin somewhere about your neck on the night when you experienced your first horrible dream. Is there still any soreness? Not at all. Can you indicate with your finger about the point at which you think this occurred? Well, very little below my throat, here. My father and the doctor exchanged glances. Laura, you cannot be alone for one moment. That is the only direction I need give for the present. It is indispensable. He turned and left the room, but came back before I had done wondering and puzzling over the oddity of all this. It was merely to say that he was going to Karnstein, and had ordered the carriage to be ready at 12, and that I and Madame should accompany him. He was going to see the priest, who lived near those picturesque grounds, for business, and because Carmilla had never seen them. She could follow later with Mademoiselle, who would bring materials for a picnic, which might be laid out for us in the ruined castle. At 12 o'clock, accordingly, I was ready, and not long after, my father, Madame, and I set out upon our drive. Passing the drawbridge, we turned to the right and followed the road over the steep Gothic bridge westward to reach the deserted village and ruined castle of Karnstein. The road wound beautifully round the sides of broken hollows, and it was there that we encountered our old friend, General Spielsdorf, who happenstance was riding to the tombs of Karnstein. The general explained, "I mean to unearth some of those fine people. I hope by God's blessing to accomplish a pious sacrilege here, which will leave our earth of certain monsters and enable honest people to sleep in their beds without being assailed by murderers. I must explain what I know now about my deceased ward." We had an invitation to attend a magnificent masquerade ball. I noticed a young lady, dressed magnificently, but wearing a mask, who appeared to me to be observing my ward with extraordinary interest. A lady, also masked, richly and gravely dressed, and with the stately air of a person of rank, accompanied her as a chaperone. The younger took the chair next to my ward, while her companion opened a conversation with me, referring to many times she had met me. She alluded to my tendencies. I overheard the conversation between my ward and the young lady. She had introduced herself with the odd name of Millarca, and insinuated very prettily her admiration of her beauty. She was very witty and lively. The young stranger lowered her mask, displaying a markedly beautiful face. It was impossible not to feel the attraction powerfully. My poor girl did so. I never saw anyone more taken with another at first sight. Presently, a butler, quietly engaged with the older lady. He left as soon as he appeared. She explained, "A piece of news has reached me like a thunderbolt. I must set out and travel by a devious route with all the speed I can muster. I am on a journey of life and death, in which to lose an hour is to lose all. I must leave my daughter with you, for she has not quite recovered her strength from a recent accident with her horse." I must admit this was a strange and audacious request. She in some sort disarmed me by stating and admitting everything from my past and present, and yet threw herself entirely upon my chivalry. How could I not take in Millarca? However, there soon appeared to be some drawbacks. She complained of extreme languor, and she never emerged from her room till the afternoon was pretty far advanced. It was accidentally discovered that although she always locked her door on the inside, she was undoubtedly sometimes absent from her room in the very early morning. She was repeatedly seen from the windows of the manor house at dawn, walking through the trees, looking like a person in a trance. This convinced me that she walked in her sleep. But this hypothesis did not solve the puzzle. My dear child began to lose her looks and health. She was first visited by appalling dreams. She was visited by a specter, sometimes resembling Millarca, and sometimes in the shape of a beast. She felt something like a pair of large needles pierce her painfully, a little below the throat. I called for a doctor to travel from Graz, and he said that my poor ward was suffering. She was suffering from the visits of a vampire. He left instructions on how I must proceed. At this exact moment, The general story was interrupted by Carmilla's voice. Under a narrow arched doorway of the cathedral, I saw the beautiful face and figure of Carmilla enter the shadowy chapel. General Spielsdorf immediately grabbed a nearby woman's hatchet and started forward towards her. Carmilla made a crouching step backwards. She dove under his blow and, unscathed, caught him by the wrist in her tiny grasp. He struggled for a moment to release his arm, but his hand opened, the axe fell to the ground, and Carmilla was gone. Well, where's Carmilla? I asked. The general replied. She called herself Carmilla. She is identical to Millarca. That is the same person who long ago was called Mircalla, Countess Karnstein. The next day, the grave of the Countess Mircalla was opened. Her features, though 150 years had passed since her funeral, were tinted with the warmth of life. Her eyes were open. No cadaverous smell exhaled from the coffin. It was filled with blood to a depth of 7 inches, in which the body lay immersed. Here then were all the admitted signs and proofs of vampirism. The body, therefore, in accordance with the ancient practice, was raised, and a sharp stake driven through the heart of the vampire. Then the head was struck off, and a torrent of blood flowed from the severed neck. The body and head were next placed on a pile of wood and reduced to ashes, which were thrown upon the river and borne away. That territory has never since been plagued by the visits of a vampire again. The following spring, my father took me on a tour through Italy. We remained away for more than a year, and to this hour, the image of Carmilla returns to my memory with ambiguous alternations. I start from a reverie, certain I hear her,